we're gonna go back to Singapore.
Yeah, just in case any of you guys missed some of that, I know it cut out in the middle of it, but yeah, just a quick recap of, the way parents and grandparents are respected in the Philippines. They're seen as very much figures of authority that need to be respected. Their opinions matter a lot. I know you talked about in Ghana, parents and grandparents are always served first at meals. That isn't really kind of a spoken tradition, but it's generally what happens. And children are expected to be very respectful of them and always acknowledge them when they enter a house or a room.
So Singapore is very like both of these countries. We're very respectful of our elders, especially of the ones related to you. I call everyone, older than me by like 5 years, auntie or uncle, regardless of if they're actually related to me. Singapore's a bit different in that it's the smallest of these countries by far, so it's very easy to maintain these close connections. So one of the most popular activities in the country on Sundays is to go to your grandparents' house for this meal where like everyone in the family, extended family, just your parents' close friends will all be there, and you eat together and you spend time talking, and you're there for like hours. You are there from like 2:00 in the afternoon till 10 p.m. spending time with your grandparents because it's such an important part of the culture to always like be close with them. And we do the same thing of we serve them first. They get the best seating if you go somewhere. One of the things that's very different is in Singapore, retirement homes aren't really a thing. When your parents get older, they live with you. End of story. They would be horrified if they were sent to a retirement home. And it's actually so extreme that it's a law in Singapore right now. They passed it maybe 10 years ago that if a parent needs like aid when they're older, a child is actually obligated to help them out. So it's very different from here.
Wow. Do any of you have grandparents that live with you? Maybe raise your hand. Do any of your grandparents live with you?
Oh, there's a few.
A few? Okay, cool. Fun. Great. So now that we've talked a little bit about our grandparents and elders and people that we really do respect in these countries, we're going to talk about children, right? The kids, you all, us, and how we would function in these countries and our roles a little bit. So here in Ghana, we've talked about how the children they are expected to take care of their elders and people that are important. They have to be there. They have to do the chores. They have to clean the house. So I know when I was growing up, I was expected to do chores as well. But I think here it's it's your duty to take care of the house and be there for your family. And there kind of is an order, and the older you are, the older sibling, they are more respected, and then they also have more responsibility as well. They're expected to take care of the younger siblings, and that's really important. So something really fun and interesting that I experienced when I went to Ghana is that people are called by the name of the day of their birth. So I was born on a Tuesday, so I'm called Ebona. Or if you're a male and born on Friday, you're called Kofi. And so a lot of times, because there are different siblings for nicknames, they'll call each other by the day that they were born. So there's a different name for each day of the week, and depending on whether male or female, then they will be called something different. So that was really cool and something I got to experience.
Well, Singapore is very similar. Children are expected to have a lot of responsibilities. But one thing that's very interesting is that carries into adulthood. So sons traditionally inherit most of the things in the family, and then women marry outside and they join another family. But children are expected to be a part of a family enterprise if there is one. So if there is a family business, I'm expected to go into it. And it's not uncommon to see children in Singapore actually leave the country to go work for the family business in Malaysia or Australia or some other country until they're old enough to come home and be a part of the company back in Singapore, which is very interesting of how seriously they take their duty. Another thing that's interesting is that this hierarchy we were talking about where you respect your elders is the same with children. My younger cousins will all call me older sister, and they're very polite towards me. They very formal at times. If I'm thirsty or something, they'll run away and go get me a drink or snacks. And it's very strange for me because I don't expect them to do these things for me. But it's considered part of the culture that you have to respect your elder siblings or your elder cousins who are supposed to be like siblings to you.
Yeah. So in the Philippines, I kind of what we all have been talking about. Children are really expected to respect their parents and grandparents since they all live together. But another thing that they place a lot of importance on in the Philippines is just family life in general. So the kids, they're expected to go to school, they're expected to do chores, but on birthdays or like big family holidays, the kids just won't go to school and they'll just stay home with their families because that's so important to them there, that family life and being with your parents, or if you're a parent, being with your kids. So they do have a lot of the aspects of Singapore and Ghana, and the fact of that family structure of kids being very respectful to their parents and parents and grandparents being figures of authority. But there's also another aspect, which is it is very formal in that way, but then there's also parts of their life that makes that family structure makes informal, such as going to school. I think most of you, even if it's your birthday, your parents are still going to, expect you to go to school. But when it's birthdays or if there's a big family gathering, sometimes kids just won't go to school because they want to spend time with their family because that's really important to them.
I think Singapore is much like the US in this, in that you don't miss school for anything. School is very important there. Definitely not for a birthday.
Yeah, so it's funny how we can find so many similarities and differences as well within all of our countries and then within the U.S. So it's fun to kind of be able to compare that because family is very, very important no matter where you go. But we all have our different traditions. So we'd like to open it up and see if you all have any questions for us.
Why don't we maybe talk a bit about why each of us were in our countries? Because I know you both had interesting reasons for being there.
Oh, yeah. So I can talk about mine. I spent 2 summers ago, I lived with a host family in the Philippines, and a couple years ago, a big typhoon hit the Philippines. Like I said, it's islands and there's a lot of water involved. So a lot of structure was destroyed by that typhoon. So I actually got to go and live with the family in a village in the Philippines and do a lot of construction work to rebuild a lot of the homes that were destroyed. So it was really cool because I got to actually live with the family. I had 2 sisters, a brother, and 2 parents in the home I lived in. And you could really tell how important family was just by being there and living with them because, they wanted me to be part of their family and were very interested in having me take part in all of their family events and practices.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can figure out ours, but let's answer some questions first.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got some great questions here. Let's see.
What are your favorite foods?
So favorite foods. Well, mine is definitely. I have never tasted mangoes that have been so sweet. They were big and green and ripe, and it was amazing. And I also really love plantains. It was the first time I'd ever eaten plantains. So you can have them in chips, fried. We made plantain pancakes one morning just to be fun. But you eat them with almost every dish. And I really learned to appreciate rice and how good it is and how many ways it can be cooked as well.
You go ahead.
Okay, this is a really hard question for me. Food is so important in Singapore. They say that eating and shopping are the 2 national hobbies. So my favorite food, oh God, that really hurt. My grandmother makes the best dumplings. And I don't know if it's, my grandmother made it, but I love them so much. It's great.
I'm trying to think back what my favorite food was. We definitely ate a lot of rice. And there was a lot of really interesting soups that had rice and chicken in them. And I just remember we ate so much soup and rice that was really interesting because I don't typically eat that while I'm here. And we also ate plantains, a lot of plantains, chips. desserts.
What kind of food do families like to eat in different countries? Sometimes know like the common dishes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Singapore is a bit different in that we have a lot of different ethnic groups. So I know a lot more about the Chinese ethnic group because that's where my mother's family plays out. So there's a lot of rice dishes and a lot of noodle dishes typically. It's very like South Chinese cuisine, so it's a lot of seafood as well, but there's also a strong Buddhist tradition, so there's actually a lot of vegetarian food that we eat.
I think it really depends. People eat a lot of starches. So yams are huge. They very huge all throughout the country, and so they can be cooked in many different ways. So a yam is not like a sweet potato. It's I was really confused about this. I really didn't understand this because that was the closest yam I had ever had. But a yam is like a root vegetable. It kind of looked like a log, like a small log to me. It's so interesting because it's kind of like a potato, but it tastes a little bit different. So it can be cooked in so many different ways. And they're, eaten boiled or mashed up, or put in other foods.
Trying to think. So in the family I lived in, the dad in our family was actually the one who would get up in the morning and deliver bread to all the stores and like door-to-door delivery for these bakeries. So there was like a lot of bread and a lot of pastries in the family I lived in.
All right.
Is there a limit on the number of kids parents can have? Repeat the question.
Oh yeah. So we have a question. Is there a limit of children people can have, or parents can have in a country? There is no limit in Ghana. People are free to have as many children as they want or do not want.
That's the same in the Philippines as well.
In Singapore, there's no limit, but as I've mentioned, it's a very small country and it's very hard to find a big house. Our houses aren't popular at all, so it's very hard to find a big apartment. So I think people are experiencing this population constraint, so they're less and less willing to have a big family just because where will they go?
When do grandparents typically move in?
Great. So when do grandparents typically move into the house?
In Singapore, I mean, this depends on the will of the grandparents themselves. Like if they want to move in, they're moving in. But it's usually when they can't take care of themselves anymore. So my grandmother recently had a surgery on her hip and she's having trouble walking. So now she's living with one of my aunts. And that's what happens a lot is, they get older, they can't take care of themselves, and then they're moving in with their children.
Right. I think that's the same. Most people really do enjoy a little bit of independence, but they also enjoy being with their families. So it's at that point where it's just better for the grandparent to move into the house so that they can be taken care of and have all their needs met, and maybe or maybe they just always grow up and are able to live in the house, and the kids don't end up moving out. So there are a lot of different situations.
And I think that's kind of similar what both of y'all were saying in the Philippines. I know one reason why grandparents might move in sooner than later is because they want to spend more time with their grandkids, just because that family intimacy and that family structure is so important in the Philippines.
Do they have sleepovers?
All right. So do they have sleepovers?
I don't remember that happening where I was staying, just because in the Philippines, the typical structure is small villages. So your friends live right next door, and all the kids in the village were like super good friends, and they would walk to school together and walk back from school together, and they'd always be hanging out all the time. So when you went home, you would just sleep, and then you'd wake up the next morning and go back outside, and your friends would be there. So sleepovers weren't super common where I lived in the Philippines.
Yeah, I think it is very similar to that because people live in areas in which all of their friends and family are very close together. So I think they do have sleepovers, and they can go and hang out. So yeah, there are all different kinds of things. It's also common for children to live at the school in which they go to. So they'll live in a big kind of dormitory with lots of different bunk beds. So it's kind of like a sleepover every day if you do that.
In Singapore, There are a lot of sleepovers in the family. Like I had a lot of sleepovers with all of my cousins because, they want us to be very close. But I don't know if there are as many, just with school friends. You spend a lot of time with school friends because the school is so intense there that I think they're kind of welcoming the chance to be free.
What type of government does each country have?
All right. So what type of government does each country have? Right now, Ghana is a democracy. They have a president. They have elections. It doesn't quite work the exact same way as ours does, but that's what they have. There is some government corruption. I think that they're starting to move away from and being able to hopefully resolve. But they do have a president and people that make decisions.
So the Philippines is also a democracy, and it's a democracy definitely in the way we think of it, but I think that because the structure in that country is a lot of little islands with a lot of little villages, there's a lot more focus on local government than there is on national government. I think, in the United States, we talk a lot about our national government, but we might not think as much about our local government, whether it be our state or our city, but definitely in the Philippines, that is much more of a topic of conversation than the national government.
That's not discussed at all in Singapore. It's also democracy because your local government is your federal government. It's a very small place. One thing that is very different, though, is that even though it is, technically democratic, people vote for who's in office, the government is much more involved than it is here in the U.S. They are very strict, and there are a lot of laws about what you are and are not allowed to say. There's a lot stricter punishments for things that we think of as trivial. This is a funny example, but Singapore is famous for being one of the cleanest cities in the world. And part of that is you're not allowed to have gum in the country. You're not allowed to sell it or buy it in the country. And you're punished with like $700 fines. And things like that are outrageous to us because how is the government allowed to get involved? But there it's very expected for the government to be very, very fiercely involved in all sorts of things.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. It's interesting how different they are. But great. So let's see. What do kids usually wear?
Singapore is a very modern city, so they wear the same things as we do. There are some populations that have traditional clothing, and that depends on if you're one of the Indian subgroups or if you're Malay, which is usually Muslim wear. But for the most part, you just wear Western clothing like this, and then on traditional holidays, you'd wear something depending on your ethnic group.
Right. Yeah, that's Ghana has a lot of just modern clothing, jeans, t-shirts, all the almost the exact same thing, maybe what we wear, just a little bit different style. They also have just amazing fabric in Ghana where they have tailors make their own clothes. So when I was there, I bought fabric and took it to a tailor, and they made me a dress, and it was gorgeous. And so these fabrics, they can be made in the country or made throughout Africa, and so they all have different designs, and one design was called sugarcane, and that's because it had these kind of long rows on it that looked a little bit like sugarcane. So they have different names, and patchwork is a style that is really cool, and it's fun to wear. So that means you have all different types of fabrics or designs on one shirt or on your pants. It's really, really popular. But this actually stemmed from people that were tailors, and they were too poor to maybe buy just one type of fabric. So they used all the different leftover pieces to make their clothing. And so it was originally made for people who didn't have as much money, but now it's so popular, it's the in style. And so you pay a lot more money for this, which is really fun.
So the Philippines also has a lot of Western influences on its clothes. So you see a lot of t-shirts, not as many jeans, just because it is pretty hot there, so there's a lot of shorts, and they do have a very long rainy season that has a lot of rain, so even more than, North Carolina sometimes gets. So there's a lot of like basketball shorts and waterproof shirts just because of that rain.
I will say this about Singapore. They really love brand names in a way that's like so far beyond. And I said that shopping is one of the national hobbies there, and they love it. When my mother goes to visit, my cousins will ask her to like go buy them a Gucci bag while she's in the US. So like the brand name is what's most important with the clothing they wear, which is a bit different than for us here.
Well, cool. All right, so we can probably take maybe like 2 more questions, 2 or 3. Let's see. We have a lot here. So we're gonna do maybe where do they get their water? That's really we haven't touched on that at all.
So Singapore is an island, and that's one of the big issues they're struggling with, is that they don't have a lot of resources and they tend to import most of their foods. And I think water, they've been working on desalinization because they're surrounded by the ocean, so they try and take ocean water and purify it. But I think because the population is so big, they're still working out that, so they may import a lot of it actually.
Wow. So a lot of the water people have wells, so they got a hole in the ground and you pump your water out from there. But for drinking water, they have, instead of using plastic water bottles, they have like these little square bags, and they're plastic, and you drink your water from that. So even people who are who live in that country native, they wouldn't drink the well water necessarily. They would still like to drink the out of these plastic bags, just so that the water is cleaner and safer. People out that are not in the city and don't have as much access to this water, they can use a pump where they pump the water out of the ground. I've seen that, and that allows it to be clean. So still kind of a well, and you're pumping it. And then people also will use like freshwater sources, rivers that go through the country. So just depending on how rural it is, but there are quite a few cities as well.
Yeah, there's, like I said before, there's a pretty long rainy season in the Philippines, so water isn't really something they're really worried about in terms of like growing plants or anything like that. And then they have a lot of pumps in the rural areas for drinking water and cooking and things like that. And then they do have a couple, really big cities, kind of even what we would think of when we think of like a U.S. city. So kind of the same way you get water in a city, you go to a bathroom or a kitchen. So similarities there.
So one of our last questions we're going to take is, what kind of games do children play? And in Singapore, they often play a lot of the same games we do here, maybe a lot more ones based on technology, because they love technology there. But children there are very focused on school, actually. So there isn't as much leisure time. My cousin, who's like 5, is already, taking violin lessons and extra Chinese lessons, even though he's in like kindergarten. So there isn't really a lot of free time to, go play sports or play card games or something.
In Ghana, they love playing soccer, or they might call it football. So they love playing soccer, and it's a great way to get outdoors. People are very, very athletic. Children are athletic. They spend quite a bit of time outside and just, playing their own games, running around. But soccer is the main one. They like all kinds of games. And, in school, within the school I worked at, we, even did like coloring books and just, singing songs. So all of that great stuff.
I know a big game where I was staying in the Philippines was basketball. They had several basketball courts. Another one was just a lot of tag, a lot of outside games, anything that involved running. They would have fun little songs that we would sing. We do kind of like campfire Girl Scout games, and you are like stand in a circle and you like smack the person's hand next to you and you go around like that. So we play a lot of those games.
So I guess this is where Singapore is different, in that since it's a city, there is no outside to go run around in. So you're lucky if you have any yard. Most people don't, and if they do, it's like 2 feet.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Well, thanks for so many great questions. They were really fun to answer, and y'all have been great today. And yeah, thanks for joining. We hope you have a great rest of the day, and hopefully are able to think about how families operate in other countries, and think a little bit more about your family and maybe why you all do the things that you do. So,
All right. Bye,
Have a good
guys.
day. Thanks for joining us.